Let's do that and move on to the pandemic. Max Nisen joins us with Bloomberg Opinion, our wonderful columnist on this horrific event. What is the magnitude of the pandemic right now, Max Nisen?
It's quite severe with the locus, the nexus very much being the Americas, the United States, South America, and very much continuing to expand. There's not much that's good to say about the trajectory at the moment. May finally get some signs that, states beginning to take it more seriously with the announcement that California is substantially rolling back activity. But the broader context of that is that it's doing it based on numbers that are on a per capita basis and for test positivity that are actually less concerning than states like Texas and Florida that have not taken as acute action. So a story that's likely to continue of an outbreak, an epidemic that's growing in severity rather than going the direction you'd like to see.
Max, we are seeing the death rate starting to tick up a little bit, but it still is far below where it was in New York and some of the other states that were hit earlier. What can we draw from that? I mean, do we get the sense that the remedies are just so much better that the mortality rate really isn't what it was initially in the pandemic?
Sure. Death rates are a complicated story and one that I'm fascinated by. I think the most important thing to point out is that most of that delay, a lot of it is just pure data lag. It's that, the real upsurge in cases was close enough that you wouldn't expect to see quite as many deaths. The second is that this current moment is fundamentally different than the initial wave in the spring in New York, especially, where the virus was spreading, completely unimpeded, without extra precautions for people that we now know to be more vulnerable. But I do expect that the rate of change, the uptick in the death rates will be less steep and not quite equivalent to what we saw in New York for that reason and because of improvements in therapeutics.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the reasons that the death rate might be lower, that's something you can't take for granted. It's not something that's going to last. If you keep adding this many cases, you begin to lose the ability to protect more vulnerable people when you have a certain amount of spread in the community. You lose that benefit of having hospitals that aren't as overwhelmed. And, any benefit of treatment sort of drops when you have less ability to treat people in the best way possible, which is what happens when you get a sufficient number of cases in concentrated areas, something that's beginning to happen.
Max, there was a survey recently of high-yield debt investors that showed that more than half of them believe that there will be a vaccine available for emergency use by the first quarter of next year. Based on the science and the developments, is that realistic?
It's about the soonest that you might expect one. But the question that you have to also take into account is, it's not just whether you have a vaccine, it's what vaccine you have and how much of it and how well is it rolled out. So the situation where you have, a broadly available, lots of stock of a particularly effective vaccine, one that's rolled out more effectively than, you're counting on a government that hasn't managed the pandemic well to now do a really good job at an extremely complicated logistical task. So there's also an outcome where it's a vaccine that's protects against severe disease but doesn't halt transmission and extract, and one that there's not that much available and the rollout is slow. So you have to sort of evaluate what you mean by vaccine available. Emergency use authorization doesn't translate to immediate bend in the pandemic or in the economy. So you just have to be careful and watch the data and make the evaluation based on that as opposed to your sort of highest hopes of what a vaccine might be. We really just don't know and won't know until we get large-scale clinical trial data, which, those trials haven't started. So a long ways to go.
Hey, Max, great to catch up with you. Max Nisen, Bloomberg Opinion columnist on the latest vaccine effort. The struggle to normalize without a vaccine continues. We see that playing out in California in the last 24 hours, reversing the reopening